I can understand the concerns that Canadians have about whether this is a shortcut, whether this is somehow uncontrolled immigration.
Justin Trudeau went on to insist that border hopping is not uncontrolled immigration and laws will be followed. Well, joining me from Ottawa to talk about all of this is Althea Raj, Huffington Post's Ottawa bureau chief, and Shachi Kurl, the executive director of the Angus Reid Institute. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Althea. I'm going to start with you. How worried is the Canadian government that maybe Canadians are lining up against it on this illegal boarding issue?
Well, I think you can see by the sheer fact that the Prime Minister went out to this intergovernmental task force and addressed the media and the Haitian community that he does feel that this is something he needs to be preoccupied with. The government is mobilizing a lot of its resources across departments to try to solve this issue. And I think the concern is not necessarily with this group of Haitians who have a particular reason why they're trying to come to Canada right now, but that more people might see this as the entry point to Canada and a shortcut to get their case heard.
So, Shachi, what are we seeing in terms of the numbers of Canadians who are feeling uncomfortable with the illegal part of this?
No, that concern and that fear is really palpable, Susan. If this goes pear-shaped for the Trudeau government, it's not necessarily going to be because the Prime Minister said one thing and a cabinet minister said something else. It will be because there is a perception that too many people have arrived too quickly, that they were perceived to have been invited to come on in by Justin Trudeau, and not just because of the shortcut factor or the queue jumping factor, but because of security. The real anxiety here, the real concern comes down to a growing unease among Canadians, particularly in Quebec, by the way, that with genuine asylum seekers who are crossing the border, who may not get a fair hearing under the Trump administration, there are people who could be criminals, who could be simply economic refugees, people who are coming in for the opportunity of it all, or the people that Donald Trump himself likes to call bad hombres. And it's in a way that bad hombre factor that is driving a certain calcifying and hardening of opinion on this issue, notwithstanding the fact that Canadians do generally want to help people in need around the world. They're also now calling increasingly for more resources to go into shoring up gaps in the border and unsecure parts of the border.
So, Althea, he earned some political capital when he set himself at the opposite of Donald Trump back in January. But a lot has happened since, and we've seen a lot of border crossing since. Has he lost, and how much has he lost in this issue?
Well, it's a fine balance that he's trying to do, right? Like, he wants to appeal to people, especially on the left, and say, you know, we are the opposite of Donald Trump. I am this sort of liberal beacon. Come to Canada. We will welcome you. That image of him at the Toronto airport welcoming refugees from Syria, for example, that's the image the Trudeau government wants. But they also don't want to be seen as being lax on border controls. And we saw today, for example, the Conservative immigration critic, Michelle Rempel, basically attack Trudeau and say, this is all your fault. If you hadn't tweeted hashtag welcome to Canada, none of this would have happened. And we saw him.
Do you believe that? Is that fair?
Well, I think his response today saying, you know, this irregular crossing is not a way to circumvent the process, when actually it is, was his way of trying to put those words back into his mouth. Unfortunately, what he said is factually incorrect, and I'm not sure that it's going to have the impact that he's hoping that it will.
So, Shachi, he did say today, look, we can navigate both, open and welcoming, and follow the rules. You know, you likely won't be successful in many circumstances. Can he successfully market both those messages?
Well, as Althea pointed out, he's talking, when he says that, on one hand to his own base, and then on the other hand to softer voters who are concerned about security and trying to reassure them. The problem is he runs the risk of those messages getting muddled. And so instead of transitioning a message and saying, we're not unaware of some of the problems with process here, and we are paying attention to that, as he says that, he keeps doubling down and sort of winking and nodding to the base that he needs to keep on side, saying, well, but hey, Canada is still a welcoming country and diversity is our strength. This is a very mixed message. And what that opens up and creates is room for critics to come in and say, are you really concerned about our refugee policy, about our asylum seekers policy? Is it too generous? And what that can do is create a perception that perhaps the policy is too generous, even if it isn't, simply because of the circumstances and the situation that's been turbocharged by the crafting of that tweet. You know, remember that when Justin Trudeau staked out some political high ground 2 years ago during the Syrian refugee crisis, there were oceans separating most of those refugee seekers or asylum seekers, if you will, from Canada physically. That's been erased by the fact that he's speaking more to people now who are in the United States and wanting to try their luck here. And, you know, all of this happens against the backdrop of a looming election in Quebec next year. Quebecers very concerned about this. The provincial opposition parties in Quebec pouncing on this issue. He's got to be concerned not just about keeping the left of center on side, but ensuring that he's not losing voters in very influential and politically powerful provinces like Quebec on this particular issue, or scuttling the chances of his provincial counterparts, such as Premier Philippe Couillard.
So, Althea, just briefly, because we're running short of time here, did he do enough today to challenge his critics who already think he's soft on migration issues and border control?
No, I don't think so. But he benefits from the traditional Liberal position of basically being in the middle. If the Liberals pay heed to what the NDP is calling for, which is a suspension of the Safe Third Country Agreement, it would allow would-be asylum seekers to use official border points and basically flood through the borders if those people are there. So that's not something that would be beneficial, I don't think. And on the other hand, the Conservatives are in this very interesting position where if they go back to the language that they used when they were in government, attacking asylum seekers and the health care that they were receiving, now in this sort of Trump prism, that might take on a whole sort of racist undertone that they do not want to play with. So the Liberals, I think, actually have a bit more flexibility in their positioning on this. And it does seem like they are trying to basically throw as much resources at solving this problem as they can.
All right. I have a hunch we'll be talking about this again. Thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Susan.
Althea and Shachi joined us from Ottawa.